Welcome to Search for Signs. My name is Gary Willing. If this information interests you, please press the like and subscribe button and press the bell for notifications. Well, good day to you, and welcome to Search for Signs. Now, this is your first time ever listening to this YouTube channel. I do want to welcome and thank you. We have over 300 videos where we talk about Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom. Through the course of these videos, we take a deeper look at who and what Maitreya is, and why are the Masters returning now to the everyday world, and what it means for you and me and the entire world. Of course, we also look at the many miracle signs that point to the fact that the one awaited by all the world's religions is already here and has been for over 4 decades. Now, we take a deeper look at Maitreya's priorities, which his biggest priority is the creation of true and lasting peace. Maitreya says, without sharing, there could be no justice. Without justice, there could be no peace. And without peace, there could be no future for any one of us. So, I want to take our conversation and move it in a different direction, or take it from a different point of view, I guess is a better way of looking at it. And I'm going to invite a person who I've known for over 12 years to come and talk to us. He works with a group called Share the World's Resources. They're out of England. I met Adam and the other members of Share the World's Resources about 12 years ago at a Peace and Justice Forum here in Atlanta. And I tell you what, I was absolutely blown away by who and what they were, what they were working for, and so forth. But their joy was infectious. I always talk about fear and joy being equally infectious. Well, I tell you, when I was around them, their joy of what they do is just, I still remember it to this day. Now, when I met Adam back in, I think, 2008, or 7, if I'm not mistaken, he and I were a lot younger. I know for myself, I call my gray hairs my summer blonde. And I noticed the other night when I was talking to him on a Zoom call that he's got some summer blonde too going on the side. So we've been working at this, for a long time. And and Mohammed and the others who are working with Share the World's Resources have been plugging away for over a decade in some cases. And I know for Mohammed, the founder of Share the World's Resources since 2003, to bring the importance and the urgency of the principle of sharing to the general public. So, without further ado, I do want to welcome Adam Parsons to the show. So, hello, Adam.
Hi, Gary. Good to speak to you.
Good to speak to you too. Well, I have a special guest today. His name is Adam Parsons. He's with the organization Share the World's Resources out of England. And I wanted to bring him on the program and talk about what the vision is of Share the World Resources and how they fit into the principle of sharing. So there's a lot to that. It's kind of open-ended, isn't it, Adam?
Yeah, there's a little bit in that for sure.
But at first, let me read out Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and then we'll go into it from there. How about that, Adam? Will that work?
Sure. Sounds good.
Okay. Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his families, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. So that was Article 25 from the United Nations. Is it their charter? Is that what that is? Or is that their constitution? Or what is that?
So that's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was written and signed in 1948. There's 30 articles within the Declaration, and Article 25 is one of the sort of the social and economic components of the Declaration. And Article 25 is quite unique and special in that it really summarizes a lot of the basic social and economic rights that people need in order to live a dignified life. And so it has a lot of simplicity and power. And there's a lot of reasons why we as an organization particularly uphold that one.
That's interesting. Now, is it true that FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, was a big author in the Article 25? Was he one of the key authors of that?
I know it well. Eleanor Roosevelt, his wife, was a key figure in compiling the Universal Declaration. There's often pictures of Eleanor when you see the UDR. I don't actually know FDR's involvement. It's a good question. So I'll have to look at the history books about that.
That was the first curveball question, Adam.
You got me there. 1-0.
So Adam, you're Adam Parsons, right? You gave me permission to use your last name. There's a lot of
Sure,
weird people on the online. But you have been working with Share the World's Resources for how long?
Do you know what? I think it's 12, 13 years. So quite a long time. So yeah. Well, I met you, Gary. It was about 13 years ago, 12 years ago. I met you, wasn't it, in Atlanta in the first US Social Forum. I think that was when I just started working with STWR in 2007. That was. So
Wow.
Yeah, the time flies. Time flies, doesn't it?
It's like a blur.
Isn't it? Tell me about it.
So, is this your full-time job?
Well, yeah, I'm very lucky that at the moment I'm working. Yeah, pretty much working with Mohammed Misbahi and some of our co-workers in London. We have some co-workers around the world. Just through a lot of good fortune that we've been able to persist for so long. And my career came out of working on newspapers, journalism in London, in the Midlands here in England, and I got very disillusioned with the newspapers and working as a reporter, and went off traveling a lot of time in India. And it was there that I became very interested in kind of social justice and political issues, but also spiritual issues. And it was the intersection of that politics and spirituality that led me to certain paths where I heard about Mohammed and his work in South India, funnily enough. And it was when I came back to London back in 2006 that I got in touch with Mohammed and heard about his project and his vision, which he started in 2003. And I was privileged to get involved bit by bit. And lots happened since then.
Well, that answers my first question. Tell me about sharing.org,
right.
Who founded it and why. So
well, there's a lot. I think Mohammed's got a lot of reasons how he came to it, but in a nutshell, it's about trying to bring a sense of the global need for justice into a very accessible people's movement. That's perhaps in a nutshell what we're about.
Interesting. Yeah, because we talk about on this channel a lot about the principle of sharing and how important it is in terms of the first step in order to create justice. There's so many people who march for justice, march for social justice and those kind of things, ecological justice even, right? And
right.
It looks like that's the first step. Must be the principle of sharing must be instituted some kind of way, or there won't ever be any justice, will there?
Absolutely. So, people, it's such a simple concept of sharing. We all understand how we share within our homes, our families, communities. But when you apply the principle of sharing to the national level in terms of how our governments function, then it's a very different story. And then if you apply that to the international level, obviously the lack of sharing in our world is stark when you see the gross divisions in wealth and living standards between the richest and poorest people within and between countries. Obviously, the lack of sharing is unbelievable. And yet most movements for global justice don't see the importance of the principle of sharing. It's like sharing is the flip side of justice. We all understand it, but it's so simple that it's not a call. You very few people call for sharing because it's such a versatile, kind of indistinct principle. But it's obvious that in the same way we teach our children of the need to share, our world as a whole hasn't incorporated that principle into its basic institutional architecture, as it were, into the way we trade, the way the economy operates. So, that's what sharing is all about when it comes to the global domain.
Mm-hmm. So where does Share the World's Resources as an organization, where do you fit into the principle of sharing? Are you about creating awareness? Are you talking with world leaders, government agencies? What exactly is your vision in that regard?
Right. I wish we were talking to world leaders. We're not quite at that point. But primarily we we are raising awareness. We have, since around in the wake of the Occupy protests, well, after 2010, 11, the Arab Spring, that was when I started working a lot with Mesbahi on his series of studies on the principle of sharing. They're called a series of books, there's a lot of education and awareness raising we do through our publications and our reports that we've done over many years, and particularly through Mesbahi's books. But also we have our campaign, which is focused on Article 25 of the Universal Declaration, and trying to put forth the vision, this simple vision of change, where people's movements, we hope, will grasp the concepts of Article 25 and the need to mobilize around that as a shared goal and a shared vision. And so we have a lot of activities within that, small-scale initiatives, direct actions we try to get people involved with, and also all of the book writing and the activities of our co-workers in different countries and our networks. And it's a campaign organization in its various ways.
Mm-hmm. So, people need to, the people are really ahead of the governments in terms of seeing what they need, right? I mean, you would think that our world leaders, being as educated as they are, as smart as they are, having the global connections that they have, would have a greater vision about what the people need than the own people. But it seems like because of the corruption, because of the greed, the complacency even, that the people are ahead of the governments in so many ways, so, it's interesting that your focus is on creating awareness with the global community more so than even the world leaders, that's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting that we live in a very difficult time in the fallout of the coronavirus pandemic, and this sense of division that's particularly since 2008, after the global financial crisis, it's like our societies have become ever more polarized, and the crises that we're facing in the world are becoming daily, seemingly more and more critical and urgent, and yet our governments don't seem to be responding on anything near to a sufficient scale, particularly with the environmental crisis. And the idea of a poverty crisis, of a hunger crisis, is becoming the second pandemic all around the world. The UN's now talking about millions, 150 million more people could then fall into extreme poverty. The UN just last week announced it's trying to raise more and more funds for famine outbreaks in various regions around the world, in Africa and South Sudan and northern Nigeria and Yemen and other places. And so there's all of these crises daily. I think a lot of people feel overwhelmed because of the lack of response from governments. And yet, really, we're at a political moment where the need for a massive civil society response has never been more urgent. So there is a lot of sense of apathy and a lot of complacency, but at the same time, we're really at a pivotal moment where it calls on every man and woman of goodwill to start getting involved, and that's what our campaign vision is all about.
Mm-hmm. So I know it's not as big of a concern in England and in Europe as it is in the United States, but there's a propaganda movement against what people see as the evil of socialism and so forth, right? I mean, because we're such a capitalistic country. I mean, you know what I mean?
Right.
I even saw this young man. He probably looked like he was about 18 or 19 at my work the other day. He had a T-shirt that said, "Socialism never." And had I not been at work, I would have said to him, what kind of socialism are you talking about? I mean, we have corporate socialism, and we've had it for decades. Unfortunately, it only benefits rich. But so is the principle of sharing, and I'm trying to play the devil's advocate. I mean, I already know the answer, the real answer to this, but I am trying to play the devil's advocate. Is what you're talking about socialism in that regard, or is it something different than that?
I mean, yeah, you could probably give a better answer to this yourself, Gary, perhaps, but
no, I
absolutely not. Sure. My answer is perhaps very simple. That the idea of sharing, like we would, in our families and communities, we share, like I was saying before. We don't describe the act of, distributing food to our our children or our relatives. We don't call that socialism or communism. We don't need to put a label on it. And it's the same if we apply the principle of sharing to how the economy functions nationally or regionally or globally. It's not a socialist idea, and it shouldn't be seen as that. It's the problem of these isms and ideologies is where we've emerged from since the 20th century and before, since the days of Karl Marx and going back into history. It's the way humanity's evolved through these isms, and yet we've reached a time where any ism that we try to create social change through is going to create more division and more conflict. And it doesn't work. I mean, if you look at the fate of Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn here in the UK, who proclaim themselves as democratic socialists or what have you, it creates tremendous division. And what we need is a more inclusive era where we can unite people of both left and right, of whatever political persuasion, with a new shared vision. And that's why it's so important for us to focus on basic human rights, Article 25, which no one can disagree with, of whatever political persuasion you come from. And there's Mesbahi actually in his books is wonderful in how he talks about the problems of isms. There's the fourth chapter in Heralding Article 25, our flagship book, campaign book, talks about this, how the absurdity of having to label our activities as socialist when what we're concerned with is having an end to poverty, an end to hunger. There's no reason why we have to label our activities in such a way. And if we do so, it will inevitably lead to a repetition of history, the same conflicts that we've seen in the past. So if you were to talk to a very rich man, one of the world's billionaires who are growing by the week, and read to them Article 25 of the Universal Declaration, they would not disagree. Of course, everyone should surely have the right to an adequate standard of living. And yet that person who agrees with the principle of Article 25 would also thereby have to admit that in order to achieve Article 25, you have to redistribute resources globally. You have to share the world's resources, because there's no way you can meet Article 25 in every country of the world unless there is a rebalancing of the economic system where resources are more equitably distributed, beginning with a massive redistribution program to share the surplus resources and food stocks that we have to make sure that no one is dying of hunger unnecessarily. So within Article 25 is the cord sharing, and yet there's no need to refer to that or think of that as socialism. Socialism is a principle, an idea that's driven many brilliant theorists and movements that have never actually worked and been brought to fruition in the world. So yeah, for us as an organization, we are avowedly not a socialist outfit.
It would be like trying to label the Native Americans as socialists, because that's what they did.
Good point.
As a community, they gave, if they had a feast or a hunt, that was, they gave it to everybody. It wasn't just for them, and then they would sell the meat to the other people. You know what I mean? So it was, and then when maybe perhaps they were ill or something like this, meat would be given back to them because they, that kind of community kind of thing. So that's the way I always kind of envisioned it in my own mind's eye, was more of a Native American way of redistributing the global resources,
Absolutely.
And it's been said, somebody asked a question a while ago, what if the nation doesn't have an excess of something to give? And it's been said that every single nation has an excess of something, to give to the global community in payment back for what they take and so forth. So it seems like it's almost like a bartering system in a way, right? Wouldn't you say? Isn't that kind of what or is it more of a...
Well, that's maybe that's the future. Yeah, maybe the long-term future. There could be a very different...
But the initial is just a crash aid, kind of give the food that we have that's rotting away, give it to those who need it, that kind of deal?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you look at the amount of wealth in the world, it's even the waste of food every day is almost 50% of food is wasted.
Wow.
There's also even within households. I mean, there is so much wealth. I mean, the Tax Justice Network estimates up to $32 trillion is stashed away and unrecorded in tax havens offshore, for example. And the world's billionaires, are increasing by the day, or seemingly. And there's so much wealth, so much resources that could be redistributed if there was just a change of priorities. So it's in the first instance, what's needed is something where akin to the Brandt Report, which I know you know about, Gary, which in 1980 the former German Chancellor Willy Brandt convened a number of government leaders in a commission to work out a plan for restructuring the global economic system. And at the heart of their proposals was the need for a massive redistribution of resources between the global north and south to eliminate hunger and absolute poverty as a priority above all priorities. And that motivation, sadly, was extinguished from the outset by the so-called neoliberal counter-revolution that happened there in the early 80s with Thatcher and Reagan and all that happened. But it's really about bringing that idea back to the negotiating table for a massive redistribution. But it has to be led not by governments, but by people. It has to become a people's cause that we need to share, that we have to share. It has to become at the forefront of popular imagination, which it is sadly far from being. And then when that happens, when the food begins to pour out to actually begin to meet human needs and prevent people dying unnecessarily on a huge scale every day, then we may begin to foresee the further kind of structural changes that we need. But I think before that happens, it will be very unrealistic to expect that we can have, all these kind of very progressive ideas for how to reform the economic system. The forces arrayed against saner methods of distribution of resources and saner policies is just immense now. So that's where we're coming from as an organization, is trying to capture people's imagination and minds with the need to look at the reality of this hunger crisis, which is as important, as urgent as the environmental crisis, which is now taken off around the world. Yeah, so
absolutely,
that's where we're coming from. Yeah.
Now, Adam, you personally, what do you think will be the catalyst to bring about the heartfelt response from so much complacency and inertia from the general population, right, to where they'll see the need to share the resources with the hungry that have no voice? There's nothing in the news about the hunger pandemic. It's all about what's going on in the markets, what's going on in sports, what's going on in, with businesses and so forth, but there's nothing in any of the news programs. So what do you personally think will be the catalyst to bring this about?
Well, this is the $1 million question. I mean, it's funny, we were doing a Zoom call last night talking with interested people about the Article 25 vision. And it's always the question that comes up, well, that's all very well, that vision, but how is it going to transpire? I mean, look at the reality. People aren't interested. There was a piece I wrote in 2017 when it was the UN had issued an unprecedented call for humanitarian funding because of the risk of famine in several regions across the world. It was the biggest humanitarian crisis since the Second World War. And now we're in an even worse situation with the COVID pandemic and the risk of further hunger. And yet still there's not that sense of this being a popular appeal. And so what will awaken people up to this? I don't know. I mean, it requires enough people to be engaged, to be aware, and to start doing something until the idea catches on. Like the idea of the 99%. A group of people came up with that slogan, and it went around like wildfire. The 1%, the 99%. But we're talking about not inventing a new slogan, but to revive Article 25 of the United Nations, to reclaim the United Nations as we the people of the United Nations, and to have that sense of ourselves as one human family, and to respond accordingly. So if there was that awareness, then a resurgence of the Occupy process. The article, the piece I wrote back in 2017 was called "Let's Reawaken the Spirit of Occupy for the Starving Millions." For me, that's the sentiment which we need. And of course, people don't respond. It's just, for some reason, it's like, as Mesbahi puts it in the book, it's like the environmental crisis has been given a first-class seat in global activism, and yet the poor don't even have a class to sit in. So what will awaken people to this is this sense of urgency. and also the sense that we can do something about this, that there is a hunger crisis, and it's not just the responsibility of our governments to do something for it on our behalf, but it's our responsibility to get in the streets and to protest, not just as a one-off demonstration led by NGOs, but as a spontaneous, grassroots-led movement from the heart, from people's compassion for others, that will lead us just to come together in huge numbers and not go home until our governments do something, until they commit to redistributing resources. I mean, look at in the UK, our government has just pledged to increase the armaments budget by £9 billion or something, and at the same time decrease the aid budget by £9 billion. So this just shows you the priorities of our political class. But it's the fact that people as a whole do not protest against this, do not do something to stop our governments to doing that allows them to go ahead and do what they want with the aid budget and their trade priorities and all the rest of it. So, I mean, I don't have I wish I had a quick answer as to what will bring this about. I mean, this is a Christ-like vision of an awakening of public consciousness that we're talking about. But yeah, I mean, it could happen tomorrow. It's about enough people taking responsibility and action themselves. So we, as a political group, a campaign group, we are doing what we can to spread the seeds, talk to people like yourself here, Gary, and try to get the idea out there so that other people can get involved and hopefully begin responding and doing something with this, because there's so much potential for direct actions and different kinds of activities that could be done. So I would see the movement we need being on a par with the kind of responses we're seeing with the environmental movement right now. So like what Greta Thunberg has done in declaring, a climate emergency, and that sense of governments, you have to stop everything until you deal with this. We also need that same sense of emergency and urgency from people of goodwill with the hunger crisis. And if we have that, demonstrations for the environment and huge global demonstrations to end hunger side by side, then I think that's the time where we may be able to see governments finally changing their priorities. So not an exact answer to your question, but
well, no, but it brings us a little closer to understanding maybe the possible. The one thing about, I'm sure this is like this in every country, but Americans being so isolated in their view of the world, right, where they go from their house to their job to the school to the whatever to the market, get their food and come back home, and then they go on. But they live their life basically in it to win it for themselves, right? And
right.
The same people, if a car crashed into a icy, swift river and somebody was about to drown, these same people would jump in and not give a second thought about it to save that person from drowning. Or if there was an earthquake or tornado, they run into burning buildings sometimes and pull people out. I mean, there's just story after story after story throughout the throughout the history of this country where people have done that those kind of things during times of crisis. And I've often wondered if whatever that button is that triggers that person to give up everything and risk everything for somebody else, that button needs to be pushed. And how do you push it? How do you push that? Because I'm sure if people saw, I've been in third world countries, I've been in Mexico, been in the Philippines, and seen people who have had absolutely nothing. And you can't, it's very, very hard, or for me, it's impossible, but I would assume it'd be very difficult for everybody to step around that and just kind of get on with their day like nothing ever happened. You'd have to be a pretty closed-hearted person to do that kind of thing. You're right. So, I know when I was in the Philippines, I lost all my appetite, and, my wife was like, why aren't you eating? And it was just because there was around so much poverty. I didn't feel like, hey, let's go have a pizza. It was like, I wanted to give them the food, you know what I mean? And it was like, I'm fine. I got enough, visceral fat around my middle. I can go a meal or two without eating, and so, but, it's just, that is, I think, the importance of what you guys are doing, bringing it to the forefront and keeping it within the mind of us complacent individuals to the point, to where, eventually something will crack, whatever, and it might, we talk about on this channel all the time about a global stock market crash, which seems to be, lingering on and kind of, it happened 12 years ago. And then, it seems like it's, with all the coronavirus and the unemployment that's coming our way, maybe that will trigger people to where they'll wake up to the fact that there are other people in the world other than themselves. Who knows, but yeah, I really, let's see, we're coming at about the 30-minute mark, and I don't want to go too much longer into it. I wanted to, if this is okay, Adam, I wanted you to talk a little bit about your book, about the flagship book from Share the World's Resources, Heralding Article 25, A People's Strategy for World Transformation. And of course, I'm going to have the link to Share the World's Resources in the top of the description of this video. If somebody wants to get more information about what you guys are doing, maybe how they could help or so forth, by all means, that link is there for you to look at. This book is also online. I know Mohammed was kind enough to send me a book, so now I got actually a hardcover book. I can read it like I used to do back in the day before the internet.
Right.
But it has, the one thing that I noticed is the chapters, the way they broke it down, and I wanted to get into it a little bit more. And maybe we should just do a follow-up interview in a few weeks if you have time, Adam, at some point.
Yeah,
I would love for you to come back on, and we can take a different angle on what you guys do. But if you could just talk a little bit about your vision, in terms of this book, and then we'll kind of end it from there. How about that, Adam? Will that work?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, by the way, what you were just talking about, Gary, you raised a lot there, a lot of really fruitful stuff. You were talking about the button. What is that button that will press? And I think what you were speaking to is who we are as human beings, our intrinsic nature. That we're not these greedy, selfish people, individualistic and competitive by nature, but as a lot of scientific discoveries in behavioral psychology and so on are showing now, that we're really hardwired to cooperate and share. And I just wanted to say that the vision in this book, it speaks to that. I mean, Mohammed writes in a very sort of personable and moving way, particularly about the need for us to come together and unite. I mean, that's what the book is all about. And it's in that coming together in peaceful protest, without isms and ideologies, and without that sense of being against the government, against this policy, against people who don't think in the same way, but with this united cause for something that unites us all, a single and simple cause for Article 25. If that was to happen, then I think this what you were alluding to, this is where we will begin to experience through huge popular protests with this different kind of perception, different kind of energy. That's when we would begin to feel that. And you got a glimpse of it in the Occupy protests, in those encampments, in these huge spontaneous protests that we've seen throughout the Middle East and the Arab Spring and so on. And in many of the kind of leaderless grassroots movements that have propped up, you get a glimpse of that different way of being, where we can relate to each other without these isms getting in the way, just as through our common humanity. And there's something very spiritual about that, in that coming together, just with a united cause through compassionate awareness for others. And I think when that happens on a large enough scale, that's when we will really begin to see changes in this world, and the complacency which you spoke about, that sense of futility, of huge depression and tension that we're experiencing in the world right now. I think that's when this vision that we're putting forth, if that can come to fruition, and in my estimation it has to, if we're to deal with the civilizational emergency that we're facing, then I think that's when the world as we know it will indeed begin to change, and we will begin to be able to perceive a more hopeful future for ourselves and our children. So that's a kind of long-winded, quick summation, but that's what I've said is essentially what this book is about. I mean, the very first paragraph of the book spells it out, the need of just coming together on the basis of Article 25, and throughout it just explores and emphasizes that in many different ways. So there you go.
Adam, thank you so very much for your time. You're so generous. I really do appreciate it. And
thank you, Gary.
Absolutely. And I look forward to you, hopefully in the very near future, you coming back on and we're talking more about this, because this is key to our survival, really. The way I see it. The principle of sharing.
Yeah.
I mean, it couldn't be more. You couldn't have picked a more important truths to try to bring forth to the American or to the world people. You know what I mean? I really appreciate it.
Right.
Man. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gary. And yeah, thank you. And there's so much to talk about. So yeah, by all means, we'll have another chat, a part 2, and we can pick it apart some more, I'm sure. And there's lots of other themes we can discuss. So I look forward to that.
Thank you very much, Adam. You have a great day.
Cheers, Gary. You too. Have a great day. Take care.
Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.